All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Digitex's second webinar in our new series, Spotlighting Digital Higher Education in Texas. My name is Heather Walker, and I'm the Program Coordinator for Digitex. And joining us today, we have two experts from Quality Matters, Dr. Brenda Boyd, the Vice President of Program Services at QM, and Dr. Bethany Simunich, the Vice President of Innovation and Research at QM. Dr. Boyd and Dr. Simunich will start us off with some critical information regarding the new 7th edition QM Higher Ed rubric, and will explain to us what changes have been made between the 6th and 7th edition rubrics, among other important details. And they will then share what our QMCs, peer reviewers, and course facilitators will need to do to ensure they remain current on their training for the new rubric. And finally, we'll end with a 15 to 20-minute Q&A period. So please be sure to put your questions in chat as you think of them. I will be monitoring chat as we go through the presentations. And when we get to the Q&A period at the end, we will start taking questions. And I will hand it over now to our speakers.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Heather. And hello to everybody. I am so excited to be here with my colleague Brenda as well. I'll have her introduce herself in a little bit. So as Heather mentioned, we're going to give you some information about the upcoming rubric. And let me start off by giving some background information. We were already introduced. I'm going to skip this slide here. So a little bit of background about why we decided to embark upon a rubric revision at this time. So what prompted the revision? So there's a little context here. Back in the spring of 2020, when we had the pivot to emergency remote learning, a lot of that really created this pathway for an increased popularity of online modalities, especially synchronous at the time. So you saw a reinvigoration of some online modalities that maybe hadn't been as popular prior to the pandemic, synchronous being one of them. We started to get a lot more questions about synchronous courses. How can we review those? We also saw a lot more institutions that were becoming more strategically involved in online learning, because that ERL then created a pathway that showed us increased student demand for online learning. In conjunction with that, we also had a QMC survey that we released in 2021, and some of you may have filled that out. And we asked how you were using and adapting the rubric. And that also reinforced for us that institutions were already using the rubric to apply it to synchronous courses, as well as, of course, asynchronous and hybrid courses. There was also an interest in expanding and deepening aspects related to inclusion and belonging in the rubric. So those are two main things that prompted this latest rubric revision. We wanted to expand it to include opportunities for synchronous courses and reviewing them. And we also wanted to deepen those aspects related to inclusion and belonging. So you are a part of it. We always release a community survey related to the rubric. The 6th edition survey link was sent out to all 85,000 of my QM account holders. We received over 800 responses. We had 1,500 independent open-ended comments that were collected. I read through all of them multiple times. So your feedback is always read and used. And that really is used to help guide the revision. So the output from the community survey, where we asked all of you what's working, what's not, do you have suggestions for improvement? All of that is written up and distributed to the rubric committee so that they could review it as well. So a little bit about the rubric revision committee. So if you don't know, QM and QM staff, we do not revise the rubric. We really work with the community on this. So there is a Higher Ed Rubric Revision Committee that was put together. We received over 200 nominations to be on the Rubric Revision Committee. It is something that is a year-long commitment, several hours of commitment per month. And the qualifications we were looking for from our community members are that you're well-versed in the higher ed rubric as it existed then, and some expertise also in diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, competency-based education, continuing ed. So any of those, special topics, specialities, and then also synchronous and multimodal digital learning environments. HighFlex also became a renewed conversation after the pandemic. These are all of the wonderful folks in the community who served on the rubric committee, the 7th edition. I really wanted to give them a round of applause here. It is a lot of work, and you can see that we do have some from Texas as well. It is a big commitment. I had the good fortune to serve on the rubric committee 6th edition, and then this is my first time as a QM staff person working on the rubric revision. So it is a lot of work from the rubric committee, also internally from QM staff. We also have a legacy committee that assists our rubric revision committee. And these are folks that have previously served on a rubric revision, and then we brought them back, and they have some historical knowledge of the rubric, and they're able to answer questions about language, maybe past conversations that bring relevance as well. This is a little bit of a visualization about the process for just how we arrive at that alpha rubric. And once we arrive at that alpha rubric, that's where QM internally, we start the process of then copy editing that and revising that and kind of testing that. But the part that the rubric revision committee is a part of is displayed here on this process. So we begin with the current edition of the rubric. This year, Brenda and I did an initial draft again because we had things that we wanted to pull in from that community survey. We knew that the primary focus for the changes were going to be on updating it to expand to different modalities, deepen those aspects of inclusion and belonging. So we thought we would give the community something to start with. And then the rubric committee itself, they were assigned to be on general standards and subcommittees for that. So they make edits in their working document, they present revisions to the larger committee, and then we have a discussion. So there's a period here where we're giving feedback. The GS subcommittee is incorporating that. The larger rubric committee provides feedback. So a lot of back and forth revising here. And from that is then produced a full second draft. And then we get feedback on that. And from that is the alpha rubric. And that is what is then used, in the Delphi process, where we go back to the committee and we're looking for those point values. Should it be a 3-point essential standard, a 2-point very important standard, or a 1-point important standard? So we use a Delphi process of scoring with the rubric committee to ascertain that information. So before I go on to the next section, changes that are in the 6th edition, just want to give you a chance here to put any relevant questions in the chat. See if there's anything to okay. So let's move on to specific changes that we wanted to highlight from the 6th edition. So as I mentioned, since this was one of the specific reasons that we undertook the rubric revision to begin with, we have new course types that are reflected. Synchronous courses, as well as higher ed institutions, will now have the ability to review continuing education courses using the QM higher ed rubric. So let me pause here for a second and give you a little bit of information about synchronous course types and how those might be reviewed. So synchronous courses have also brought about some changes for hybrid courses. So in the past, what QM had done for hybrid course reviews is peer reviewers were tasked at looking at what is the online portion of that hybrid course. They were not, of course, available to go to the face-to-face on-campus portion of a hybrid course, so they were relegated to looking at that asynchronous online portion. We're now in a different era of online learning where I think the bar has been raised, especially since the pandemic. And so really what we wanted to provide was a pathway for institutions to be able to showcase all the good things that they are doing live, both in virtual courses like a synchronous online course, and also that live in-person portion of a hybrid course. But to do that, we have to have what we're referring to as artifacts for the peer reviewers to look at. So let me give you an example. Let's say that I am teaching a 100% synchronous online course, and I am predominantly using that synchronous, that virtual class time to deliver lectures, and then I usually follow it with some breakout group discussions or a larger group discussion with a class. So how might I then put some artifacts of that in the asynchronous course site so peer reviewers would have something to look at? I could share the recording of the class as long as no student information is available. I could, if I was using, for example, PowerPoint slides to deliver that lecture in my synchronous class, I could upload the PowerPoint slides, and I could do that before or after because there's reasons why it actually might be a benefit to students that they could preview the material. I could also write up just a short text example explanation of what we're going to cover in class that week. So something that gives the peer reviewers information about what that content is so that they can determine whether or not, for example, it is aligned. And then same thing with those discussion questions. I could simply post the discussion question that we discussed during that synchronous class in the asynchronous LMS site. So that could be, again, before class starts, and I could say, these are the questions we're going to be discussing in today's class. I want to give you some time to think about them. Or if there's a pedagogical reason I don't want to release those questions in advance, I could just have the discussions synchronously and then kind of post a summary or a follow-up in that LMS course site along with the question that was asked. So again, that allows reviewers then to see what that activity was and to make that determination. Is that activity, or maybe an assessment that took place live, is that aligned, and looking at any other standards that might be relevant as well. So opportunities for reviewing new types of courses include synchronous courses and continuing education courses. And there's now different requirements for reviewing hybrid courses. So we do want to see the entirety of the course and allow peer reviewers to look at that in a holistic way. There are also some language changes. So we did modify blended, and we are now using the term hybrid. We looked to the educational environment and all of you and what term is most common now. So we did make that change from blended to hybrid. We're also using that global term of objectives to refer to either objectives or competencies. So just to make it a little bit less verbose within the rubric, we're saying we respect whatever you use at your institution or individually as a faculty member or staff member. We are going to refer to these globally as objectives. Also, a little change for activities and assessments. This came out pretty clearly in the community survey that there were a lot of questions, especially from reviewers, trying to differentiate between specific review standard 3.1 dealing with assessments and the alignment of that, and specific review standard 5.1 that dealt with activities and the alignment of those activities, whether or not they're interactive, active learning. That whole general standard deals with that. So we tried to delineate them a little bit more by saying learning activities are something that allow your learners to practice that new information that they're getting, practice their new knowledge, use their new skills that they're forming. They help prepare learners to be assessed on the material. So when we give students an activity, really the primary pedagogical goal there is not to assess it, but to give them a chance to work with this new information, make mistakes in a lower stakes way that allows instructors to provide them with feedback. And that's differentiated from assessments, which really are that direct measurement of learning objectives. And if you want to think about it in terms of formative and summative assessments, you still can. And then those practice learning activities really help learners prepare for those assessments. In terms of the annotations, we tried to really enhance them in specific ways. Again, we were pulling a lot of this feedback from that community survey. There's a greater emphasis on reviewers and what reviewers are called or guided to look at. That is now bolded in the annotation. More clear information and additional information about when and how a specific review standard is met. We've also included updated and additional examples as well as more context. Because of the synchronous courses, the inclusion of them, as well as in continuing ed courses, there are call outs for hybrid courses, as there had been synchronous courses, continuing ed, and also competency-based education, again, as there had been. Additionally, there's been a deeper focus on belonging and creating community and inclusive aspects of that learning environment in the annotations as well. So by the numbers, you can see not a lot of huge changes here. We do have now one more standard than we had before. So you can see the breakdown with essential standards. We have one fewer essential standard than we had in the previous edition, one additional 2-point standard, 2 additional 1-point standard. So in terms of points possible, sadly, we no longer have that nice number of 100. So we now have 101 as the total points possible, with 86 points as the minimum to meet standards. And still all 3-point standards must be met. Ancillary supports also got a little update. So this is something we've been getting a lot of good feedback on. In the course worksheet, we are now asking you to also supply a course map. You may also call it an alignment map. That is something that's now required. We've also updated our course format chart. So again, that includes the new formats for courses, synchronous, that you can put up for a QM review. So new evidence requirements by modality are delineated on the updated course format chart. And we've also provided updated definitions and a few new terms in the glossary. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brenda.
All right, that's a lot of information, and I've got more for you. But don't worry, I'm not going to walk you through all 44 of the specific review standards. What we're going to do next is go through the general standards, and I'm going to give you kind of an overview of the changes that were made in each of the general standards. So I think I can move the slides through the magic of technology. Okay, so general standard 1, overview, course overview and introduction. We added annotations, and this is kind of true throughout the rubric, where we added those additional annotations as necessary for synchronous courses, for competency-based courses, and for continuing education courses. So sometimes continuing education courses are self-paced. You will see some caveats in the annotations around, like, if it's like self-paced and learners can't introduce themselves in the course, then that can be marked met, right? Because we know that that's not going to happen in that, because of that course being a self-paced continuing education course. So those types of things have been added into the annotations for General Standard 1. We did have some changes in language to a few of the specific review standards, and that was meant to clarify those specific review standards. So netiquette's out, communication guidelines are in. So there's some things like that that are happening with the rubric. So we don't really say netiquette anymore. It's kind of an outdated term. So we are really talking more about communication guidelines. The focus is, as you might expect for the overview and introduction, is around creating community and making everyone feel like you belong in this course. So you'll see some additional information in there about, creating a welcoming environment. Even instructor introduction is about being welcoming, rather than, it used to say professional in the 6th edition. So it has that that focus on creating a learning community. So General Standard 2, as Bethany noted, we have moved away from learning objectives or competencies or outcomes, or whatever you want to call it. Like, it was too cumbersome, right? So we've streamlined that in General Standard 2 throughout General Standard 2 and throughout the rubric. And then there are new examples for specific review standard 2 in the annotations, and we got rid of the table that explained the examples, and that was problematic for accessibility reasons. So there's new examples in there that you'll see come July 5th that are more, they're definitely much more realistic as far as what you would find in a course. And then specific review standard 2.4 added assessment. So if you don't have the rubric memorized, 2.4 is about the connection between the learning objectives and the activities, but the rubric committee suggested adding in and the assessments. So give us the big picture. And so that connection is made clear, and it used to say something more specific. And so made clear language is invites faculty to provide that in a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be in a particular way. As long as that connection is made clear somehow, it could be a graphic, it could be a video, there could be lots of different ways that faculty may design their courses to make that connection clear between the learning objectives, the activities, and the assessments. We also have new examples for the annotations for 2.5. So that's the extent of the changes to General Standard 2. Alignment is still alignment, everyone. So those 6 general standards, those specific review standards are still the same specific review standards. We just made them a little more clear in terms of the annotations. So moving on to General Standard 3, assessment and measurement. We have included in this edition alternative grading approaches. You may have heard of like narrative grading, ungrading, or those types of grading mechanisms. Those have been added to the rubric on how those things are utilized within a course. So you can have that if that's your grading policy, then just explain it that way, right? that this is how grading will happen in a course like that. Specific review standard 3.5, that connects the types and timing of assessment with timely feedback. So 3.5, we really examined it a lot because it is all about helping learners track their progress with that kind of timely feedback, those practice activities that Bethany was talking about earlier, about how do you actually help learners with those low stakes self-check quizzes. You'll see a lot of that when you take the rubric update too, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We have a new standard in General Standard 3. It's 3.6. This standard is the assessments provide guidance to the learner about how to uphold academic integrity. So if this is an opportunity for course designers and to make the connection between, that policy from the institution that might just say don't cheat, right? And then it could, but in the assessment, are you allowed to collaborate with your friends on a particular aspect of it or not? Can you use a calculator? Can you use the internet? Can you do some of the things that, make it clear to the learner around how they can, what is acceptable and what's not acceptable with that assignment, with that assessment, because it really brings that opportunity to address academic integrity, not by being like the academic integrity police, so to speak, but instead being more about, here's how you can be successful on this assessment. And these are the types of supports that are okay for you to use. These are the kinds that are not okay for you to use. So kind of clarifying that expectation, and it can be within the whole course. It doesn't have to be, oh gosh, well, I have 70 assessments. Am I going to have to put this in everything? You could make a blanket statement, right? Like if the rules are the same for all of the assessments, you can make a blanket statement. So just want to be clear about that it's not like, oh boy, how am I going to ever implement this? So so this is a new standard. It's 1 point, as we do with new standards. We give them an importance so that, and we see how that goes with the community. So that's the beginning of, so that's the one new standard that we've added. Now you'll note that we have 2 more standards. How did that happen? Well, I'll get to that. So General Standard 4 is all about instructional materials, and the publisher materials are included in the review. We've made this much more clear in the 7th edition. That's always been a part of a course review. However, we didn't really specifically state, make sure to review the publisher materials. It was kind of like if it's available, but now we've said they have to be reviewed. In some cases, we have seen courses that have just publisher course pack in it, and that's all there's there. And so we want to make sure that that is reviewed. So that is part of the review process. So we made that very specific. And then standard 4.4, which is all about, to represent up-to-date thinking in the discipline. And this kind of goes beyond just the publication date. It's not just about the publication date, but it's about, is this up-to-date theory and practice in the discipline, which could be old, right? Like you could have a seminal work that is from 20 years ago, but it's still very relevant. It does represent the up-to-date theory in the discipline because those things hold true still. So in standard, specific review standard 4.5, we have added 2 new types of variety. So you have your variety of instructional materials. That's always been in 4.5. So the committee suggested adding a couple new kinds of variety into 4.5. So one is a variety of perspectives. So having underrepresented authors, people whose voices are not usually heard in courses. That's one way to think about variety. And then the other type of variety is variety of different representations. So using examples that reflect your student audience, using names that reflect their culture, or using images that reflect the students rather than the instructor, like who takes your course. And so 4.5 has 3 types of variety in it in the 7th edition, and there has to be at least one type of variety in the course for that standard to be met. So, you know, the recommendation from the committee was there needs to be 2 types. And when we test drove this in course reviews, because we have new demonstration courses, we found that this isn't always possible. So then that was a very valuable experience for both the committee that were serving as the reviewers and the professional development team. So and us as co-chairs to figure out like, oh, well, apparently that's not going to work. And that was so helpful for us to figure that out before we rolled this out to the hundreds of thousands of you who are using the rubric out in the field. So, so we realized that one type would be great. That doesn't mean that as reviewers, you couldn't make recommendations for the other varieties of type. So something, we feel like this is a really exciting addition to the rubric as well. General Standard 5 is all about learning activities and learner interaction. So in 5.1, we did more of that clarification that Bethany was talking about, the clarification between activities and assessments. What are you supposed to look for in 5.1? And then 5.3, the committee worked really hard on this one. This is the instructor's plan for interaction, right? That's the one that you know from the 6th edition is the instructor plan for interaction. They wanted to give this a little bit more, help instructors with how do you really do that? So this is about having substantive interaction at regular intervals. Now, we know that there is a United States regulation about regular substantive interaction. So this standard is really about making sure that those interactions are happening on a regular basis. However, meeting 5.3 doesn't necessarily mean that you meet the U.S. Department of Education expectations for regular and substantive. Those are still being, I think, clarified by the Department of Education in the United States. So, but this is supporting that idea of regularly interacting with learners in substantive ways. 5.4, that one is talking about learner interactions. And in the new annotations, it talks about how those interactions can be culturally impacted. So making space for learners who maybe are from cultures where speaking up isn't usually expected of learners. So making space for a diversity of learners is a part of 5.4. And then standard 6, course technology. In 6.3, it is really looking more now at a variety of aligned technology. In the past, it seemed like it was kind of similar to 6.1, but 6.3 has been changed to recognizing a variety of aligned technology. So you're not just using technology for technology's sake. 6.3 is about the variety of technologies used in the course, right? So it could be that, that we want that the instructor or whomever is designing the course to have thoughtful decision-making around the technologies that they're choosing and using to help the learners meet the objectives. So that's, and there are so many technologies out there. we know that there's just open the App Store, right? Like there's so many technologies. So this is one of those ways that we are looking at that, but we also want that technology to be an aligned technology. And then specific review standard 6.4 added some more information. This is about like obtaining your technologies. And so we wanted to make sure that we were talking about webcams and their use for synchronous courses. So that was added to the annotations in 6.4. All right. And then General Standard 7 changed a whole lot. It's more aligned in the wording. 7.1, which is about technical support, addresses the digital divide by talking about how learners how can they access free or low cost internet, or if they need hardware or software, how can they obtain that? So kind of pointing to some of the things that we discovered during the pandemic and the early days around access to internet and access to devices. We know that there were many students out there just using their phone to take their courses. And so there are many programs now as a result of federal funding that have provided a lot of programs for internet connectivity and so forth. So letting the learners know about that. So that's the biggest change in 7. So I didn't want to spend a whole lot there because I know you're all waiting for 8. Accessibility and usability. So General Standard 8 is definitely the one that has changed the most dramatically. General Standard 8 has 2 aspects to it, and we tried to make these much more clear because even our rubric committee is very experienced with the rubric, had trouble parsing like which standards are accessibility and which are usability. And so we believe that this the changes that have been made are much more clear around, you know, when it says the text is accessible, we hope that that is clear that that's the accessibility standard. So 8.1 is about navigation and ensuring that that the course is easy to navigate. And so we have there's some updated strategies there for ease of use in 8.1. And then in 8.2, which is the course design facilitation readability, right? That one is around 2 kinds of readability. So the presentation of the text, right, itself, that you're not going to put yellow text on a white background and no one can actually see it, or the fonts are all crazy. And then, so that's the presentation type. And then the other part of that is the content. Is it free of errors? Is it like, you know, it's difficult to read things that are fraught with typos, right? Like, is it easy to read the content itself? So that's the other piece of 8.2. And so 8.3 has been split in 2 again in the 7th edition. So it was previously text and images. That's the one you all know and love. And then now it is just text. The text is accessible. So, and then 8.4 is about images. So we broke that one standard into 2 so that those things could be reviewed separately. We know that this was difficult for reviewers to review all of those things together in one standard. And that, what did you do if, well, the text is accessible, but part of the images aren't, and is that 85%? And it just made it too difficult and muddy. So we split those 2 into 2 again. And 8.3 is a 3-point standard and 8.4 is a 2-point standard. So we had gone through, and there was another iteration of this. I will just give you an inside scoop that said all images are going to be accessible, including in videos. And so the application of that during our demo course reviews, we found that that was not reviewable. So we changed it. So it became, so we turned it into image accessibility. So when you think about 8.4, you're thinking about static images. Okay, so that's what 8.4 is all about. And then 8.5 is where we're reviewing video and audio accessibility. So are there captions or transcripts, and you know, all of that fun stuff that goes with video and audio accessibility, also a 2-point standard. 8.6 is about ease of use of multimedia, and we have focused on that on the ease of use. So that's, again, that clue of use, usability, right? Like how you use it. And then 8.7 is where we lost a point. So that used to be a 2-point standard, 8.7, which is the current 8.6 in the 6th edition about VPATs. The rubric committee decided that that's important, but it's not very important. So that one was went down in point value. So overall in the rubric, there are 10 points available for accessibility. So out of 44, that's like almost a quarter of the rubric. So pardon me, we feel like that's we're still giving accessibility the importance that it requires for everyone. So so that's the little walkthrough there. I'm sure you have a lot of ideas about, you know, what does this mean for you? So, okay, so let me go on to, because I'm sure you have some questions. I want to tell you about how you're going to get ready. So first of all, rubric workbooks. You know it, you love it, you live it. And if the cover's falling off, that means it's time for a new rubric workbook. So that's what we say here at QM. Everybody's cover is falling off. So we're like, okay, now it's time. So pre-ordering is open now. So your QM coordinator can order rubric workbooks for you. We would recommend that you work with your QM coordinator to do, because we have some bulk pricing available, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So we have pre-order available. June 5th, which was yesterday, the rubric update session opened for all QM members. So you are all able to go in there, and I know some of you have already been in there. I recognize your names. Have been in there. It's completely self-paced. It's online. It's available for everybody. So July 5th is rubric release day, and that's when we're going to start shipping out the rubric workbooks. You're going to see it in professional development that starts on or after the 5th. And we will be using that in course reviews starting on July 5th and after. You'll see it in the CRMS. You'll be able to look at it in the self-review tool. You don't have to wait for your rubric workbook to land. You will be able to get to it right away in my QM. Go to the CRMS, start a self-review, or you can just look at a sample course review or worksheet and it'll be there too. So you don't have to actually start a review. So pre-ordering is open now for rubric workbooks. We have, oops, what has happened to my slides? Okay. Okay, so pre-ordering is open now. So if you would like to pre-order rubric workbooks for your campus, you can do so. We recommend doing bulk pricing, doing bulk orders, because you get bulk pricing. The more you order, the less they cost. And if you just order one rubric workbook, it's $30. And then there's a $13.95 shipping and handling charge that our printers charge to put it in an envelope and make sure your address is right and get it into the mail on time. So we really recommend going with the bulk order if at all possible. But you are absolutely able to order 1 to 5 rubrics, and they'll be $30 each. And then there's a affiliated shipping and handling charge. So, so that's exciting news, right? So and you're like, oh boy, that's more expensive, Brenda. What happened? Well, I could tell you there's 20 more pages of rubric goodness in this 7th edition rubric workbook. So you're going to get a lot more rubric. And that's because of the work of the rubric committee. They have really done a great job of adding lots of examples you'll be able to use. So, okay, so how do you get ready? You got to get updated. So you all know the 6th edition, and you're ready to, let's find out what's going on with this 7th edition. So you can, it's now open, the rubric update. We open it 1 month before we release the rubric. And you all are probably thinking, why would you do that? Well, we need reviewers ready to go on July 5th to participate in those course reviews. So if you are a reviewer, if you're a peer reviewer, master reviewer, and you take the rubric update, you're going to be eligible to serve on course reviews starting on July 5th, once you have completed the rubric update. So, and if you haven't completed it, you won't be able to be put on a review for an official review until you have. So just want to let you know about that. So the rubric update is free, it's self-paced, it's online, it's asynchronous, and you can allow 6 to 8 hours to complete. But some of you who really know the rubric will probably go through much quicker than that. And if you're going to read everything and watch all the videos, there's some really amazing videos that the rubric committee put together to tell you about how to apply the standard. And well, what if you created your course for the 6th edition? Now what do you do? These videos are great for that. They explain everything, how you want to prepare for some of the key specific review standards. We don't have a video for everyone, but there are some very key ones that have videos for them so that you can take a look at that. So give yourself some time to soak it all in. There are self-checks throughout, so we are practicing what we preach and giving you an opportunity to apply your learning. And then we move on, and then once you have completed the content, you'll take the quiz. And once you have attained an 85% or better, I know all of you overachievers want 100%, so you go back and retake it. You can retake it, but you cannot reach it until you have access to the content. So any member of Quality Matters organizations can complete the rubric update. But it's only required if you are a role holder. So that is anyone who's a peer reviewer, master reviewer, facilitators. We really want QM coordinators to take it too. It's very helpful for everyone to take the rubric update. So if you have one of these digital credentials on this slide, you have to take the rubric update. So the digital credentials on this slide are for peer reviewers, master reviewers, facilitators of the APPQMR, the IYOC, and the DYOC. So all facilitators and the course review managers, you all have to take it. Roles will be expired on for facilitators on October 31st of 23. And then for peer reviewers, master reviewers, and course review managers, your roles will be expired on January 5th or 6th. I think the 5th is a Friday, so somewhere around there. And so you have until then. The rubric update is free that whole time. So you have 6 months. We want to make sure everybody has enough time to complete it. It doesn't, it won't take you 6 months. So important caveat. And then one thing to note too here is that you might see here that I've stacked these two credentials together. So if you facilitate the APPQMR online and face-to-face, you'll be able to take one recertification. So facilitators are going to have to recertify also. So I'll talk about that in just a second. So I already have shared this with you all. So here's the information again and about your restrictions. Facilitators, when you recertify, you'll need to take the rubric update. Finish that first, number 1. Number 2, register for recertification courses. We're not sure, we have many facilitators out there that facilitate all QM rubrics or all of the QM workshops in all modalities. And so if you facilitate the APPQMR online and face-to-face, there is a combined session you can take for $220 instead of the single session for $165. So we tried to make it less of a lift for you. If you facilitate those the IYOC or DYOC, you will also be able to, if you do them, so it's one per workshop. So IYOC, if you do that one online and you do the APPQMR online, that's 2 different certification courses you'll have to take. But if you teach just the IYOC and you teach it online and face-to-face, then there's one session that has both of those. I know it's a little bit confusing, but facilitators, check your resource sites. There's some announcements in there. So now we're ready for all of your amazing questions.
Denise, I saw you keeping track of the questions in the chat. Would you like to read those off for us?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. The first question is from Diana from the University of Texas, San Antonio. Does there need to be a specific note that the artifacts are part of the synchronous part of the course? And Bethany, I believe that question was for you.
That's a good question. I would think it would be hard to mention or include it and not make a note that this is something that happened live or this is something that will be happen live. I can say that it doesn't require it to be specifically labeled as such. Brenda, do you have comments that you want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, so we know that your synchronous course is happening, right? And there's that, as Bethany was talking about, you have your course site. So reviewers are going to look for that evidence. So if you think about it from the reviewer aspect, like what am I looking at here? Like, does it make sense? And that could be a summary of like, here's in this folder is everything that I do in class meeting 3 or whatever. Does that help, Diana? Okay.
Great. So and does anybody have any follow-up questions related to that, those comments and question? I'm sorry. Okay. The next question, or it's actually a comment from Dr. Rod. In my opinion, SRS 4.5 is broad and difficult to assess because everything can fit in the definition. So Bethany and Brenda, would you like to comment on that?
I think in the annotations, you'll find that there are a lot of really good examples of what each of those 3 varieties of type look like. Mm-hmm. And the committee really did a great job of explaining how those things might appear in a course. And we also look to our subject matter experts on our teams to help guide the team with this as well. So is this a variety or not? I think some of it is like, how do you know when it is met, right? So we have, as we mentioned at the beginning, put some instruction to reviewers in there. Reviewers, the standard is met when there's at least one variety of type. So if you just have one book and that's it in your course, then you may not meet standard 4.5. And so if you have multiple, like here's some articles, here's some opposing viewpoints. So I think that the course that was reviewed that made us rethink this all was a math course, because there was only one way to look at, there wasn't a lot of opportunity to put in different perspectives, or it might have been like health definitions. So there's some different things like that, and also having a variety of representation is something that the team really they were very thoughtful about that as well. Looking at different ways that learners can access and consume the materials in their course. So those are all ways that, it may be easily met, which, I hope so. We want there to be a pathway for, for people to include these different kinds of variety in their courses. So reviewers would still likely provide recommendations on other types of variety that they could see being added to the course. So,
just to add to that, one thing that I find helpful sometimes is to go back to, the spirit or the thinking behind a particular specific review standard and its annotation. So looking at 4.5, some common ways that you might think about that is we're trying to really encourage instructors to make good use of that digital learning environment. So in 2023, if a fully online course only has a hard copy textbook and has no other types of materials, despite the sheer amount of variety of content that can be curated and that is so good to use, we're saying that's probably not what we want to see reflected in a quality course in 2023. Because of course there's videos, you can do online lectures, there's a million different things that you could do to add variety to content type. In terms of other types of variety, so Brenda, for example, had brought up a variety of approaches, a variety of perspectives or voices. that's something that may not be applicable in every single course or discipline, but certainly is applicable in a lot of them. But that's why we're giving these different ways to look at a variety in terms of content. You could have that variety of type. You could also have a variety of perspectives. And that's also an invitation to instructors to say, are you really reflecting what the field is talking about now? Are there ways that you are potentially excluding, particular perspectives or voices? And this is an invitation to include those. So I think actually with the revised SRS 4.5, that it'll be easier to assess because we've given you more options for how variety can be reflected in course content.
So Brenda and Bethany, thank you very much. Dr. Rod, I failed to mention you're from Victoria College. Thank you for joining us today. And I see that you made another comment in chat. And Dr. Rod, feel free to also unmute yourself as well. I'm trying to get back to your comment here. And Bethany and Brenda, he just said in chat is not standard to be particular, which result quality. And so, and Dr. Rod, you can elaborate that and unmute yourself if you'd like as well.
Yeah, if you're able to expand on that, I'm not quite sure I'm understanding what the question is there, Dr. Rod. Are you able to say that in a different way, perhaps?
Oh, did we lose you, Dr. Rod?
I interpreted it as, is it not a standard to be particular, like this is what you have to do to result in quality? And so I think that that's what we are saying, is that having a variety of instructional materials in any of these three ways, you could accomplish that. So I think that's definitely one of the, there's not one way to achieve quality, and the rubric really does reflect that in terms of you have all kinds of courses meet standards.
Yes, yeah. If that's what you meant, I would absolutely reiterate what Brenda just said. In fact, we try to do a very good job of saying here's lots of examples and lots of ways that this particular standard can be met, while also saying these are not exclusive ways that it can be met. To me, even when I was using the QM rubric at higher ed institutions, that was one of the biggest benefits to me, that it is not prescriptive and there are so many different ways to meet individual standards. So I'm hoping that answered the question. If it didn't, sincerely, I encourage you to repost it because I want to make sure that we answer any questions that you do have. So hopefully I didn't misunderstand that. Okay, good, thank you.
Perfect. And Alamo Colleges has a question, Alamo Colleges district, I'm sorry. And they asked, will there be a PRC update as well?
So the PRC is not, the peer reviewer course, and that is a course that is only taught by Quality Matters. So we will not be, it will be reflecting the 7th edition beginning after July 5th. But anyone who's completed the PRC may take the rubric update. So that may be something that if you require that for your internal review process, you may require that for your reviewers internally to take the rubric update. And does that help answer your question, Rudy? Yep. Okay, great. I see you clapping. Great. Okay, cool. Thank you, Alamo.
Yes, I'm sorry, Brenda, go ahead.
No, I just said awesome. That's great.
So our next question from ME, this is my understanding. So recertification is not the same as doing the rubric update, and the rubric update must be done to recertify. Is that correct?
I think that question is about facilitator recertification. Is that right?
And ME, feel free to unmute yourself.
It's about a facilitator recertification.
It is about, okay, yes. So it's a two-step process mostly for facilitators. You have to take the rubric update first, and then you take the rubric, and then you take the facilitator recertification. The reason for that is that we have kind of two things that are new for all of you who facilitate workshops. So we have the rubric, and then we also have new demo courses. So everything's new really in the rubric, in the workshops. And so we want to get everybody up to speed on the rubric. The rubric update will give you the entree into the recertification. So we wanted you to complete that before you came into the recertification, so you'd know what was going on and have a sense of what the changes were before you land in the recertification.
And then we don't need to redo the peer reviewer certification unless it's our turn to do so, you know.
You don't have to retake the peer reviewer certification course again. No, that's not a requirement. That's the job of the rubric update, is to update all current reviewers.
Okay.
So if you, let's say you're taking the peer reviewer course right now, you may need to take the rubric update once you complete it, because everything is going to be finished up by the end of the month. But then we start again in July with the 7th edition. So does that help, Michelle?
Yeah, that does. I just wanted to be sure. I was paranoid about it.
No problem.
Thank you, Michelle. And that was Michelle from Austin Community College Districts. Thank you.
y'all.
And we have another question from Alamo Colleges. From a financial perspective, and for many community college demographics, only having to purchase one book is something that is considered when building course content. If only one book is used because of this, how do we move forward? Perhaps we need to wait until we have the 7th edition workbook to see annotations.
Yes, so I hope what I said was not misinterpreted. So let me try this again. What I meant was, let's say that a course has a textbook, but there are no online lectures. There are no websites that the students go to. There are no web articles. There are no journal articles. There is nothing else. There is one single darn textbook. There is no other form of direct instruction happening in that course. So very few online courses look like that anymore, but we still do have some. Those are holdovers, I think, from bygone years. So that's what we're saying here. But I love this question because it also pays attention to the cost that is borne by students. So I would also love to say that the annotations here, we do make note of encouraging use of open resources, OER. So even if you do use one textbook, I encourage you to look at OER options to truly reduce that cost for students. That is something that we really try to pay attention to. And that's also what we're talking about in terms of variety of type, because there is so much free content out there that is vetted and that can be curated by online instructors. That is what we're saying. There's a wealth of variety of type out there that can be used. So I did not mean that if you only use a textbook, you cannot put your course up for QM certification. It will never meet 4.5. So I misspoke if that's what was heard. And hopefully I've clarified that. Then let me know in the chat if that makes sense now. I don't want you to come away thinking QM says we can't just use a textbook. That's not what I meant at all. My apologies.
Alamo College is said 100%. Thanks.
Okay. All right.
Heather is telling me that is all the time we have today.
We are right at 3 o'clock, and thank you so much to both of you and to all of our attendees for such wonderful discussion questions. I did drop a link into the chat box for our survey for this webinar. If you don't mind taking a few moments to complete that before you head out. And if you have any questions we didn't have a chance to get to today, please feel free to send those to me and I will make sure to get you the answers.
Yep.
So thank you all so much for attending today. Thank you to Dr. Simonich and Dr. Boyd. And we hope to see you at one of our next webinars in the future.
Great. Thank you all so much. Great to be with you today. Appreciate your time.
Bye.
Thank you all.